Warsaw, 1965. The city sleeps, unaware of the darkness that prowls its streets. A black car, gleaming with an unnatural sheen, rolls through the fog. The Black Volga. Its engine growls like a predator. Its windows, black as oblivion, hide the faces of those who never return. They say if you see it, it's already too late. The Black Volga is more than a car. It's a curse. A passenger of nightmares carrying the souls of the damned into the void. And tonight, you're going for a ride. The first time I saw the Black Volga, I was 10 years old. It was parked at the end of our street, gleaming under the amber glow of the street lights, its windows dark as if they had swallowed the night itself. My grandmother made the sign of the cross the moment she saw it and hurried us inside. "Never look at it too long," she warned, her voice trembling. "It sees those who see it." I didn't understand what she meant then, but I do now. Warsaw, 1965. I was no longer a child, but a journalist for the Głos Warszawy, a small newspaper always chasing the next scandal or political controversy. But what I was investigating now was neither political nor scandalous. It was something far worse. People were disappearing, and the only thing they had in common was a sighting of the Black Volga before they vanished. At first, the police dismissed the reports as urban hysteria. "People go missing every day," one officer had told me, over coffee and cigarettes. "Warsaw is not as safe as it used to be." But I knew better. The disappearances weren't random. The victims had been seen speaking to a stranger driving a Black Volga before they were never seen again. I had a lead. A young boy, Marek, had survived an encounter with the car. His mother had pleaded with me to speak with him, to understand what had happened. When I arrived at their modest apartment, the boy was curled up in his bed, pale and silent, his eyes staring at the ceiling. "Marek," I said gently, "tell me what you saw." He shook his head violently. His mother took my arm, whispering, "They say it's the devil's car, driven by something that is not human." I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but Marek finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The driver," he said. "He had no face." My blood ran cold. That night, I stayed up reading old folklore, desperate to understand what I was up against. The Black Volga had been whispered about for decades, but some stories traced its origins back much further, back to the days when the forests of Poland were ruled not by men, but by something far older. A knock at my door startled me. I wasn't expecting visitors. As I hesitated, the air in my room grew heavy, as if I was suddenly being watched. The knock came again, louder this time. When I opened the door, the street outside was empty. Then I heard it, the sound of an idling engine, deep, guttural, and waiting. The Black Volga had found me. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands trembled as I reached for my coat, the weight of my notepad in my pocket feeling insignificant in the face of what was outside my window. The sound of the engine grew louder, vibrating through the walls. I crept toward the curtain, barely lifting the edge, peering through the sliver. There it was. Sitting at the curb, its chrome reflecting the dim glow of the streetlight, the Black Volga seemed almost ordinary, except for the way the darkness clung to it, as if the night itself refused to touch it. Then the passenger door swung open. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. I waited for someone to step out, for some sign of who or what was inside. But the door simply gaped open like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I don't know how long I stood frozen in my tiny apartment, my mind battling between curiosity and sheer terror. Finally, the door swung shut with an audible click. The engine revved, and the car rolled forward, disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I met with an old historian, Professor Wojcik, who specialized in Slavic folklore. His office was a mess of books and papers, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and tobacco. "You've heard of the Black Volga?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He nodded, rubbing his beard. "More than that. I've seen it." My pulse quickened. "When?" He sighed. "The first time was during the war. My father was taken the day after we saw it. No one believed us. They said the Germans got him. But I know what I saw. That car, it's not just a ghost story. It's something much worse." "What is it?" I pressed. His gaze turned distant, lost in memories that had haunted him for decades. Some say it's a government vehicle used to silence those who know too much. Others say it's the devil's carriage collecting the souls of the damned. But the oldest stories, they say it is a relic from the old gods, a punishment, a hunter that takes those who look too closely at the things we were never meant to see. The weight of his words settled in my chest like a stone. Then why did it come from me? He looked at me then, his expression unreadable. "Because you asked questions, and now it knows your name." I left the professor's office with more questions than answers. The city streets felt colder, the people around me mere shadows in the growing dusk. Every time a car passed, I flinched, expecting to see the gleaming black frame of the Volga waiting around the corner. As I walked toward my apartment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, was a man dressed in black. His suit was immaculate, his shoes polished. But it wasn't his clothes that unsettled me. It was his face. Or rather, the absence of one. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over where his features should have been. I turned sharply into an alley, my breath ragged. I had to get home. I had to lock my doors. But when I reached my building, the Black Volga was waiting. The engine revved once, as if it recognized me. The driver's side window rolled down slowly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Then, a voice, low, guttural, inhuman, whispered my name. And I knew that running wouldn't save me. The night after my encounter with the Black Volga, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window made me flinch, and the shadows in my apartment seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping toward me. My instincts screamed that something was watching, waiting. At dawn, I gathered my notes and left my apartment, needing answers before paranoia consumed me. My first stop was the police station. I had to know if there were any reports of disappearances matching the pattern I had uncovered. The officer at the desk barely looked at me as he stamped papers and smoked his cigarette. "Missing persons?" he said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "There are always missing persons. What makes your case special?" I slid a list of names across the counter. These people all vanished under similar circumstances. They were last seen speaking to a stranger in a Black Volga. He hesitated, his fingers tapping against the edge of the paper. Something in his expression shifted. He knew something. "Look, friend," he said, lowering his voice. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stop asking about that car. People who get too curious about it, they disappear too." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "So it's real? You believe it?" The officer glanced around as if checking for unseen ears. I didn't say that. I'm just saying some things are better left alone. That wasn't an option for me. I left the station with more questions than answers, but at least I knew I wasn't chasing shadows. My next stop was the home of an old woman who had reportedly seen the Black Volga years ago. When I knocked, she answered hesitantly, her eyes wary beneath her headscarf. "I have nothing to say," she muttered, trying to close the door. "Please," I begged. "I just need to know what you saw." She hesitated, then slowly opened the door, motioning for me to enter. Inside, the air smelled of old candles and dried herbs. Icons of saints lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch us. She sat down at the small wooden table and folded her hands. It was 1952 when I saw it. My brother, he was taken. "Taken?" I prompted. Her lips trembled. The car stopped outside our house. A man stepped out, dressed in a black suit. My brother went to speak to him. I told him not to. Mama always warned us about the Black Volga. But he laughed at me. Said I was superstitious. Tears welled in her eyes. He got in the car. I watched it drive away. We never saw him again. A shiver ran through me. "Did you see the driver?" She hesitated, then nodded. He wore dark glasses, but when the light hit his face, there was nothing beneath them, just smooth skin, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. I swallowed hard. The Faceless Man, just like the one I had seen watching me. "Did you ever hear from your brother again?" I asked. Her eyes darkened. "Sometimes at night, I hear knocking on my window, 3 knocks, soft and slow. When I look, there's no one there. Just the whisper of my brother's voice calling my name." A heavy silence filled the room. I stood thanking her for her time, but as I reached the door, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I nodded. Her grip tightened. "Then it knows you now, and it won't stop until it takes you." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I barricaded my door and kept the lights on, but nothing could ease the creeping dread in my bones. Then, at exactly midnight, I heard it. 3 soft knocks at my window. I froze. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, no way for anyone to be outside. Another knock. Slow, deliberate. My breath hitched as I forced myself to turn my head. The curtain swayed slightly, as if something or someone had brushed against it. Then, from outside, a whisper. My name. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat in the silence, waiting as my heart pounded against my ribs. Minutes passed, then hours. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my terror, and I drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up, the room was silent. But on my window pane, there was a single, dark handprint. And outside, at the end of the street, the Black Volga was waiting. I woke with a start, my breath ragged and cold sweat clinging to my skin. The memory of the whisper outside my window was still fresh, haunting the edges of my consciousness. The Black Volga had not left. It was waiting. I forced myself out of bed, my legs unsteady. The window was as I had left it, save for the dark handprint smeared on the glass. My first instinct was to touch it, to confirm its presence, but something deep inside me recoiled. Instead, I reached for my notepad, writing down every detail while my mind was still sharp with fear. I needed answers. The old woman's warning echoed in my mind. Then it knows you now, and it won't stop until it takes you. I grabbed my coat and rushed outside. The street was empty. No Black Volga, No signs of anything unusual, but that didn't mean it was gone. I knew better now. I spent the day in the city archives poring over records of missing persons and unsolved cases. The Black Volga had been spotted as far back as the 1930s, each time linked to disappearances. Some reports mentioned children vanishing from playgrounds. Others spoke of men in black suits approaching unsuspecting victims. Then, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photograph, yellowed with age, taken in 1941. A group of people gathered in front of a Warsaw bakery. In the background, parked at the curb, was a Black Volga, and beside it stood a man in a black suit and dark glasses. I brought the photo closer, my heart pounding. The man's face was just a blur, like an unfinished sketch. No features, no expression. Just like the Faceless Man I had seen. A chill ran down my spine as I realized something else. The people in the photograph, all of them, were on my missing persons list. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the photograph. I felt like I had uncovered something I wasn't supposed to see, something that put me in danger. A knock at the door made me jump. 3 knocks. Software. Slow. I didn't move. My breath caught in my throat. I turned off the lamp, sinking into the shadows. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Another knock. I inched toward the peephole, my hands shaking. I hesitated before looking through. The hallway outside was empty. Then the lights flickered, and a whisper slid through the air. My name. I stumbled back, my vision swimming. The air felt thick, suffocating. I pressed myself against the wall, waiting, listening. Nothing. Slowly, I approached the door again, forcing myself to look through the peephole once more. This time, the Black Volga was parked outside, and the Faceless Man was staring right at me. I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair, gripping the photograph like a talisman. I knew I had to leave the city. I had to get away before it was too late. Morning came like a fever dream. I packed a small bag and left my apartment without looking back. My plan was to find Professor Wojcik again. He was the only one who might have answers. As I walked, I noticed something strange. People were staring at me, not openly, but from the corners of their eyes, their expressions unreadable. It was as if they knew. At the tram station, I saw him again, the Faceless Man, standing at the opposite platform, motionless. Then, as the tram pulled in, I caught my reflection in the glass. And behind me, seated in the tram car, was a man in a black suit, waiting. I took a seat at the back of the tram, my body tense, my breath shallow. The man in the black suit sat a few rows ahead of me, his posture unnervingly stiff. I couldn't see his face, but I knew. He knew I was watching him. The tram rattled forward, the city passing in a blur outside the windows. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, matching the rhythmic clatter of the tram wheels on the metal tracks. I reached into my pocket and clutched the old photograph. It felt warm, unnaturally so, as if absorbing my fear. Then something changed. The world outside the tram windows darkened, like a shadow falling over the entire city. The other passengers didn't seem to notice, their faces blank, their gazes fixed straight ahead. I swallowed hard. The streetlights flickered as we passed. The tram driver was barely visible, his face obscured by darkness. It was as if reality itself was thinning, peeling away layer by layer. Then, the tram screeched to a halt. The doors hissed open, revealing a street I didn't recognize. Not a single soul walked its cracked pavement. The buildings loomed in unnatural silence, their windows black voids. And there, waiting just beyond the tram stop, was the Black Volga. My pulse spiked. The man in the black suit stood up, adjusting his cuffs. He turned slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face, or rather the absence of one. A smooth, featureless void where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. No expression, no humanity. He stepped toward me. My body locked up in terror. The tram doors were still open. I could run, but my limbs wouldn't move. Then, just as he reached for me, a voice cut through the stagnant air. "Don't look at him!" It was an old woman, hunched in a seat near the front. She clutched a rosary in trembling hands. "Look at the floor, don't meet his gaze!" I forced my head down. The presence loomed over me. My skin crawled, the air growing colder. The tram doors slammed shut. The tram lurched forward, the sudden force snapping me out of my paralysis. I dared a glance at the window. The Black Volga was receding, the faceless man standing still as a statue, watching as we left. I turned to the old woman, my throat dry. "What was that?" She stared ahead, her fingers still clutching the rosary. "They mark those who see them. Once they have your name, they follow. They whisper. They wait. And then, one day, you step into their car, and you are never seen again." I swallowed hard. "How do I stop it?" She finally looked at me, her expression filled with sorrow. "You don't." The tram slowed to my stop. I hesitated before stepping out, but I knew I had to keep moving. The woman's voice followed me as the tram doors closed behind me. "Pray. They haven't already taken too much of you?" The city felt different now. Every shadow stretched too far. Every face in the crowd seemed to be missing some crucial detail. A mouth slightly too still, eyes that refused to blink. I hurried through the streets, my mind racing. The words of the old woman on the tram echoed in my ears. "You don't stop it. You only pray it hasn't already taken too much of you." I needed help. And there was only one place left to go. Professor Wojcik's office was in an old part of the university, a building with walls stained by time and the whisper of forgotten knowledge. I rapped my knuckles against the heavy wooden door, my breath shallow. Seconds dragged by like hours before it creaked open. He peered out, his deep-set eyes widening when he saw me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I have." My voice was barely above a whisper. "They know me now." Without another word, he stepped aside and ushered me in. The office smelled of old paper and ink, a world detached from the modern city just beyond its windows. Shelves sagged under the weight of books about folklore, demonology, and forgotten history. A single lamp cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. "Tell me everything," Wojcik said, motioning for me to sit. I recounted every detail: the Black Volga, the faceless man, the photograph, the whispering voices. As I spoke, his expression darkened, his fingers absently tapping against a yellowed book. "I was afraid of this," he muttered when I finished. He pulled a thick tome from the shelf and flipped through the brittle pages. "The Black Volga is not just an urban legend, it is a harbinger, a vessel for something older, something that has been feeding off this land for centuries." I shuddered. "Feeding on what?" He hesitated before answering. "Names, memories, the essence of what makes you, you. Once you see it, once you acknowledge it, you become part of its world, and it does not let go easily." My pulse pounded. "How do I escape it? How do I stop this?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You must break the pact." The professor led me to a hidden chamber beneath the university, a place I never would have known existed. The walls were lined with symbols, old Slavic runes carved into the stone. Candles flickered, their wax pooling in strange, deliberate shapes. This place was built centuries ago, he explained, by those who understood what lurks in the dark. The Volga is a curse, tied to a ritual. If we can sever the connection between you and it, you may have a chance. He gestured to a large circle etched into the floor. Step inside. My heart pounded as I obeyed. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the air grew heavy, thick with unseen energy. Wojciech began to chant in a language I didn't understand, his voice rising and falling in a haunting rhythm. Then, the whispers started. Not from the professor, not from the shadows, from inside me. My name, spoken over and over again. A cold force wrapped around my throat, pressing, squeezing. I gasped, my vision swimming. The candle flames stretched unnaturally high, their glow revealing something in the corner of the chamber. A shadow, shifting, waiting. The professor's chanting grew louder, more frantic. The runes on the walls pulsed, as if alive. And then, the whispering stopped. The air snapped like a rubber band, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping. The weight on my chest lifted, the crushing presence fading. Wojciech knelt beside me, his face pale. It is done. For now. I gripped his sleeve. For now? He hesitated before answering. The connection is severed, but they are still watching. They do not forget. He met my gaze, his expression grave. You must leave this city. Tonight. Do not look back. Do not speak of them again. A cold dread settled in my stomach. But I knew he was right. I had been given a second chance. I wasn't about to waste it. That night, I packed only what I needed and slipped out of my apartment. The city was eerily quiet, the streetlights flickering overhead. I avoided open roads, taking back alleys and side streets. When I reached the train station, I didn't hesitate. I bought a ticket for the farthest destination available. The platform was nearly empty, just a handful of travelers lost in their own worlds. The train rumbled into the station, its headlights cutting through the thick night. I exhaled in relief, stepping forward. Then I heard it, a car engine, slow, purring. I turned my head ever so slightly. There, at the far end of the platform, was the Black Volga. Its polished surface gleamed under the flickering station lights. The passenger door creaked open. A man in a black suit stepped out. Not the Faceless Man. Someone else. Someone who looked just like me. My body turned to ice. The duplicate tilted his head, a slow, unnatural movement. Then he smiled. The train doors opened behind me. My legs felt cemented to the ground. The other me took a step closer. Your seat is waiting, he murmured. A cold wind howled through the station. The lights flickered one last time, and then went out. Darkness swallowed the train station. A void where sound should have existed, where movement should have been. The only thing left in the world was the Black Volga and the thing that wore my face. The duplicate took another step forward. The smile remained stretched across his face, wrong in every possible way. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. I could feel it from where I stood, the hollow, empty presence of something that should not exist. The train doors behind me remained open, an invitation, an escape. But I knew it wasn't that simple. I took a step back. My double mirrored me, his body moving with eerie precision. "Where will you go?" he asked. His voice was my own, but it echoed, layered, as if something else was speaking with him. I gritted my teeth, my hands clenching into fists. "As far away from here as I can," he chuckled. "You think distance matters? You saw us. You let us in." The Black Volga's engine growled, low and hungry. The train whistled one last warning before departure. I had seconds to decide. Then, without thinking, I ran. I threw myself onto the train just as the doors hissed shut behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled down the dimly lit aisle. The car was empty. No passengers, no conductor, just rows of cracked seats and dust motes floating in the sickly yellow light. The train lurched forward. The station outside disappeared into the night. I sank into a seat, forcing my heartbeat to slow. But the air around me felt wrong, thick, charged with something unseen. Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. I turned my head slowly. A few rows ahead, someone was sitting with their back to me, tapping their fingers against the window. I hadn't seen anyone board, hadn't seen anyone in the entire station. My stomach twisted into knots. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get off this train at any cost. Then the figure turned its head just slightly, just enough for me to see. A black suit, dark glasses, no face beneath them. My blood turned to ice. The Faceless Man was here. I shot to my feet, gripping the seat in front of me. The air felt heavier, pressing against my chest, suffocating me. My breath came in short gasps as I staggered down the aisle, trying to put distance between us. The train's fluorescent lights flickered. With every flash, the Faceless Man seemed to be closer. Tap, tap, tap. His fingers drummed against the window. I forced my legs to move, to run toward the next car. My hand slammed against the door, and it slid open with a reluctant hiss. I stumbled through, slamming it shut behind me. This car was empty too, darker, the flickering lights barely holding on to life. I pushed forward, my breath harsh and ragged. Then I saw it. My reflection in the glass window beside me. But it wasn't me. The other me was inside the reflection, standing perfectly still, watching. His eyes were empty voids, his mouth twisted into something between a grin and a scream. "Nowhere left to run," he whispered. The train groaned. The lights flickered and died. For a moment, I was plunged into pure, suffocating blackness. And then, I wasn't on the train anymore. The world shifted, warped. I stood in a place where the sky was an expanse of roiling black clouds, and the ground stretched into infinity, covered in something dark and wet. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the air. In front of me stood the Black Volga, its chrome surface gleaming under the non-existent light. The driver's door opened with a slow creak. The Faceless Man stepped out, and behind him more figures emerged from the shadows. Dozens, hundreds, all dressed in black suits, their faces blurred, indistinct. The air around me grew colder, heavy, like I was being pulled down into something unseen. A voice slithered through the void. "You are already ours." A hand gripped my shoulder. I turned and found myself staring into my own face. The other me smiled, his teeth too sharp, too white. "You should have accepted the ride." A deafening roar filled the air as the Black Volga's engine revved, its headlights flaring like twin suns. The ground trembled beneath me. My body felt weightless, as if the world itself was unraveling. I couldn't run, couldn't move. The faceless figures closed in, their hands reaching, stretching. Then, a sound, a whisper cutting through the chaos. "Nani na nambini milabay." "Abay adab," woman's voice, distant but clear. I knew that voice. The old woman from the tram. A rush of wind slammed into me and the world inverted. The darkness peeled away, unraveling like a thread pulled too tight. The figures dissolved, their forms shattering into empty space. The Black Volga let out a final angry snarl before vanishing into nothingness. I woke up gasping, my body drenched in sweat. I was on the train. the real train. The morning light streamed through the window. The station outside was unfamiliar, a small town far from the city. The seat beside me was empty. No faceless man, no reflection staring back at me. But something was different. The air still felt wrong, heavy. And when I checked my hands, my fingers trembled, because they weren't quite my hands. My skin felt too smooth, my fingertips too unfamiliar. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Then, in the reflection of the train window, I saw it. Not the faceless man, not my duplicate, but the Black Volga, waiting, watching. And I knew, no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to escape, it wasn't over.